Hi everyone, it's Alice, and today I'm gonna do some book recommendations for you based on books that you may have already read and love. I feel like this is a pretty well-known concept, so I probably don't need to explain it. And it's interesting because I'm actually usually quite wary of book recommendations that are based on comparisons to other books. And usually the way that I come across it is that like on the covers of books when I'm in a bookshop or something will say this book is for fans of these books, or like this is a mix of this and this. And I feel like half the time it just isn't really accurate. At least I read the book and I feel like it doesn't make a lot of sense. And the one that always throws me is when a book says this is like The Secret History, because it never is. Hopefully my recommendations today make sense though, and I'm gonna go through the books and talk about like how I think they're similar and like what parts of the book I feel are similar. And maybe that's why very often me reading the backs of books and reading comparisons doesn't really work because it's not specific enough. Maybe that's why. But I'm going to try to be a little bit more specific, and we have a lot of books to get through, so we should probably just get into it. We're going to start with the two books that actually made me want to make this video because I read a book recently, and in my review of that book, I made a comparison to another book, and it made me think of all of these recommendations. So first up, we have I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Harpman and The Unworthy by Agustina Bazterrica. So, I Who Have Never Known Men is a book that starts off with us meeting our main character, and she lives in a cage with 39 other women. None of them remember how they got there. None of them know what they're doing there or why they're there, and very few of them have any recollection of the time before, and they don't really like to speak about it. And our main character doesn't remember anything from the time before because she's the youngest of all of these women. And the story is about them and their life in this cage. They are watched over by guards 24/7, and the guards never speak to them. And the story is sort of a little bit about life in the cage, but also what happens when an alarm goes off one day and that changes everything. The Unworthy also follows a female main character, and it's set in a post apocalyptic world where our main character lives in a convent where, yes, she's safe. Kind of, but she also has to be a part of this weird, violent religious order. And in this system, she is an unworthy, and she dreams of becoming an enlightened, which none of them really knows what that means or what that entails because they're kept away from everybody else, but they're told that it's better. Then one day, this stranger joins the ranks of the unworthy, and the stranger sort of forces the main character to look at not only the system that they're in and what is actually happening, but also sort of taking a look at this past that she has buried deep inside of her and that she barely remembers. Now, some obvious similarities between these two books is that they're both dystopian and they both follow female main characters, specifically main characters that are not always super likable. Like, the main characters in these books are complex and very interesting, and sometimes you're not going to agree with what they do or what they say or think, but they are very interesting to read about. And the writing, although it's not the same, it has like a similar vibe to it. I think the settings in these books are quite different, even though they're both dystopian. And yeah, I think I would say that although both of them are violent, the Unworthy is definitely like it's a different kind of violence that's more in your face, which, if you've read anything by this author, that will not surprise you. A thing that they also have in common, these books, that maybe struck me the most is that because of the narrative style and the fact that we only get the main character's perspective in these stories, there is a limitation to that. And because of that limitation, there is a limit to how much we get to know and see and how many answers we get. Like, both of these books are the kinds of books where you're not going to get answers to everything. And if you don't like that, you're not going to like these books. But if you do like that, like me, these are great, I would say. Both of them are also very thought provoking, and even though you don't get to know everything, at least for me, these were the kinds of books where when I finished them, I was like, what was that? And what does it mean? but in like a great way. Secondly, we have more dystopian books with 1984 by George Orwell and Youth Without God by Ödön von Horváth. And obviously 1984 is quite a well-known book. It's very famous, and Youth Without God is more of a forgotten classic. And even though these books are quite different, I remember when I read Youth Without God, it gave me a lot of the same feelings as when I read 1984. And although they're different, they have some very interesting similarities. I'm sure you already know, but 1984 is a dystopian book where our main character lives under a totalitarian regime, and everything and everyone are constantly watched over by Big Brother. And the story is about our main character rebelling against the system and the lack of freedom, which in this society, that rebellion has a lot of consequences. Youth Without God follows a school teacher who becomes disillusioned with the regime's propaganda and the blind obedience of his students, and the story sort of takes off when he reprimands one of his students for a racist comment, and because of that, he gets reported and he is accused of sabotaging the fatherland. So you can imagine what kind of society we get to see in here. The major similarities between these two books is that they both explore living under totalitarian regimes, the loss of individuality, and the control of society through fear and propaganda. Both are critiques of ideology, and both of the main characters in these books face a sort of moral crisis where they have to decide whether to conform or to rebel, and they have a lot of the same themes, all of which are very interesting. They are a little bit different in tone, though, I would say. Like, 1984 is super bleak, and although Youth Without God is also bleak, it's not as, like, in your face, and 1984 feels grittier in a way, and I'd say that the main characters, although they have some similar things going on, they are quite different from each other, and the societies are a little bit different, but again, they have a lot of the same themes, and like I mentioned, both of these gave me like a similar feeling, and it really, like, both of these really made me think after I'd read them, and both of them are books that I still think about all of the time. Okay, last dystopian pairings before we move on to some other genres, we have The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood and The Book of the Unnamed Midwife by Meg Elison. Which, again, these books are quite different from each other, but I just feel like if you like The Handmaid's Tale, you would like this one as well, because they explore some of the same themes, and both of them are pretty dark. Now, The Handmaid's Tale, of course, tells the story of Offred, who lives in a near-future world in a country that used to be the United States, but is now the Republic of Gilead, and in this near future, birth rates have drastically declined, and in Gilead, they've basically set up a system where fertile women are baby-making slaves for the elite, and Offred is stuck in the system, and she has lost everything. She is not allowed to read, and they are prisoners and slaves, basically. The Book of the Unnamed Midwife is set in a post-apocalyptic world where this fever has ravaged the human population and killed off almost everyone. And when I say everyone, I mean like almost everyone. There are very, very few people left. And for some reason, the fever killed off more women and children than men. So of the people who are left, most of them are men. There are very few women and basically no children. And we're following a main character who is a midwife, and she may be the last midwife left on Earth. And she survives in this world by disguising herself as a man. The things that these books have in common is that they both explore womanhood, motherhood, female oppression, and the loss of autonomy, and both books follow female main characters that are trying to survive in very hostile environments. Now, the hostile environments are very different in these books. In The Handmaid's Tale, we have a very structured system based on religion, and in the Book of the Unnamed Midwife, there is very little structure. Everything is just wild and chaotic. The writing is also kind of different. They have some similarities in the narrative style, but the writing has like a different feel to it. In The Handmaid's Tale, things feel very claustrophobic, and in the Book of the Unnamed Midwife, things are sort of bleaker and grittier, and that is kind of different between these two, but there are some things about the writing that is also a little similar. So I think if you like the writing in one, you would like the writing in the other, even though they're a little different. Both have quite a desolate feeling to them though, even though that desolate feeling comes across quite differently, and they're both quite bleak and dark books, although I will say, like, the Book of the Unnamed Midwife really takes the cake when it comes to how desolate it feels, because like I mentioned, there are very few people left in this world, and like sometimes we come across characters where the book will say that the main character comes into contact with them, and after that, they don't meet any other people for the rest of their lives. Like, it's that bad. So it really has this huge, like, desolate feeling, and it almost feels like an empty space in a way. So the worlds are quite different. Both of them do have this thing though where these like records that the main characters are making in The Handmaid's Tale, it's like these audio recordings, and in the Book of the Unnamed Midwife, she's writing a diary. Both of these are considered in the future later as like a singular record of that time, and they're like studied after, which is like a weird thing that these books have in common, but it's also a thing that I really like in books. So that also makes them a little bit similar. And both are also just very thought-provoking and very interesting reads that makes you think. Okay, we need to switch it up a little bit with some lighter books now because all of those are quite heavy. So let's do these two. We have Days at the Morisaki Bookshop by Satoshi Yagisawa and Welcome to the Hyunam Bookshop by Hwang Bo-Reum. And I feel like the similarities between these two are pretty obvious. Now, Days at the Morisaki Bookshop follows a 25-year-old woman who finds out that her boyfriend is marrying someone else. And they happen to work together, and so she just decides she needs to leave that job. And she ends up living above her uncle's bookshop. And she helps out in the bookshop a little bit. And this bookshop is like in this neighborhood that there are hundreds of bookshops in, which is amazing. And the story is all about her going there to heal and also discovering a love of reading, even though she didn't really like to read before. Welcome to the Hyunam Bookshop is also about a woman who leaves behind everything after she gets divorced, and she opens up a bookshop in this tiny little neighborhood in Seoul. And the story is about her trying to get this bookshop up on its feet and also make it not only a great bookshop, but a meaningful place for the community to gather. Both of these books are translated. Days at the Morisaki Bookshop is translated from Japanese and it's set in Tokyo, and Welcome to the Hyunam Bookshop is translated from Korean and it's set in Seoul. And even though both of these are translated from different languages and they have different settings, they do feel quite similar, and the writing is very like calm, slice of life, just exploring the life of these women who are changing something in their lives and trying to find themselves in these bookshops. And both of them are really sweet, lovely stories, and I'd really recommend both of them. I think if you like one, you'll like the other, and if you haven't read any of them, I would maybe suggest starting with Days at the Morisaki Bookshop because it's a little bit shorter, and then if you like this, you can read this. Keeping on with the translated books, we also have the DallerGut Dream Department Store by Lee Mi-yi and the Rainfall Market by Yeong Gwang. And none of these are like super well known, but if you're into sort of slightly weird translated books, you may have come across these. DallerGut Dream Department Store is a mysterious town that exists in our collective subconscious, and you can only go there when you are sleeping. And it's basically a department store where they sell dreams, and you can browse around until you find a dream that suits your needs. We're following a main character who starts a job in this place, and through her working in this shop, we sort of get to explore this very weird and whimsical world. The Rainfall Market is also set in this mysterious place that only opens up during the rainy season. And if you send a letter to this abandoned house, you may get like a ticket to go to the Rainfall Market where you can shop around for a whole new life for yourself. And our main character gets to go to this market. She's kind of down in life and she just wants something else for herself. And so she gets to go and she is followed around in this market by this magical cat companion. I think the strongest link between these two books is this like magical, whimsical vibe that they both have. And both are set in places sort of outside our world, and both places are there to sort of fulfill a need for people, and people can like change their lives by going there. A big difference is that in the DallerGut Dream department store, we're following a person who actually works there, whereas in the Rainfall Market, we follow a person who visits to go get a new life for herself. So that is a little bit different. But both are also translated from Korean, and there's something about like there's a certain quality to these translated books that's really hard to pinpoint, but they do have like similar feelings to them, I feel. And both are very just magical, whimsical, and a little weird. Another thing that also makes them a little bit different, I would say, is that the main character that we're following in the Rainfall Market is quite young, and the book feels a little bit younger. It's the kind of book that I feel suits both younger people and adults, whereas in the DallerGut Dream department store, we're following a more mature character. She's not super old, but she's like older, and the book probably feels overall a little bit more adult. So the feeling in like the age is probably a little bit different as well. Then we have some graphic novels actually, and with these ones I'm really just going off of vibes. I just feel like if you like one, you'll like the other. It's Garlic and the Vampire by Bree Paulsen and The Princess and the Grilled Cheese Sandwich by Deya Muniz. And both of these are some of my favorite graphic novels, and I love both of them. Garlic and the Vampire is set in this magical village of vegetable folk where we meet our main character, Garlic, who is a very anxious little person, but who is surrounded by friends and loves spending time in the garden, and all is well until this vampire moves into the neighborhood, and this freaks everybody out, and they decide that someone needs to go check out this vampire, and they decide that Garlic should go because she's Garlic, and even though she's very, very nervous, off she goes to see what's up with this vampire. The Princess and the Grilled Cheese Sandwich is set in the Kingdom of Fromage, and we're following a main character who has to disguise herself as a man in order to inherit from her father. And she leaves behind where she's grown up and she moves to the capital city. And all is well, everyone is buying her disguise, things are going great. And then she meets the princess, Princess Bree, who is very captivating and is catching all of her attention, basically, and this complicates some things. Now, some of the differences here are pretty obvious. Like, Garlic and the Vampire is an adventure story, and The Princess and the Grilled Cheese Sandwich is more of a romance book. Garlic is set in like a magical forest type setting. The Princess and the Grilled Cheese Sandwich is set in a fictional magical kingdom. I guess it's not that magical, actually, but in a fictional kingdom. And they are different in that way, but they are very similar in like the feeling of them, because they're both so wholesome and super cute and just like will make you feel all warm and fuzzy inside. And the color palettes are also very different, obviously. Like, Garlic has a very earthy tone to it, and the Princess has like more like blues and pinks, and it's a little like lighter, I would say. But a thing that really, like, the thing that made me think if you'll like one, you'll like the other is, one, the humor in both of them. They are kind of like silly books in a way, and they lean into the silliness and the humor. They're not without depth, like both of them have like nice messaging, but they are a little bit silly, and the way that the characters are drawn in both of these, it's amazing. Like, the way that the expressions are in both of these books, it really captures the emotions of the characters. And I think because of that, if you like the style of these kinds of graphic novels, you'll like both of them. Both of them can also be read as standalones. Garlic is technically not a standalone. It does have a sequel, but you can't read it, just this one, if you want to. And then this one is a standalone as far as I'm aware. And I just think they're really funny. Like, there are things that just make them funny. Like, it's a funny concept that a garlic person is like confronting this really funny vampire. And then it's really funny in The Princess and the Grilled Cheese Sandwich that cheese is such a big part of the story. Everything is named after cheese, like all of the characters and the place. And this kind of humor just tickles me. It just makes me chuckle. And they're just both very wholesome, sweet, funny reads that if you're in a bad mood, like both of these, I feel would cheer you up. Moving on, we have some more of my favorite books with Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ng and Ask Again Yes by Mary Beth Keane. And I read both of these quite a few years ago, but both are books that I still think about a lot, and now that I'm holding these, I really need to reread both of these actually. Little Fires Everywhere is set in a place called Shaker Heights, where everything is just so. And we're following this rich family, and the mother of that family becomes entangled in the life of this other mother who is a more like free-spirited artist type of person. And the story is about how these families sort of get entangled, and there's a lot of tension there and a lot of drama, and we're exploring the lives of these mothers and also the mystery of this particular fire that happens. Ask Again Yes is also set in a suburb, but this one is in New York, and we're following two families that are neighbors that, like, the kids of the family fall in love, but then there's this tragic thing that happens that breaks them apart, and the story is all about the repercussions of that event, which spans decades. Both of these books are excellently written, and I really think if you like the writing style in one, you'll like the other as well. And both of these have similar focuses with like family dynamics, and it's all about the relationship between the different characters, and they have similar settings. Both also have similar themes of forgiveness and healing, as well as privilege and class, and both of them have multiple perspectives, and the perspectives are not just some of the family members or some of the generations. We follow both like parents and children in both books. Now, Little Fires Everywhere does have this mystery of this fire, which is a little bit different, and I'd say that although the tone of these are quite similar, Ask Again Yes is maybe a little bit more emotional in a way. They do also have different kinds of time spans. I think Little Fires Everywhere takes place over about a year, whereas Ask Again Yes spans several decades and generations. We start off in the 1970s, I believe, up until current day, so it's like a bigger time span. Both of these books made me feel similarly though, and I felt similarly invested in the characters because of the way they're written, and like you just get very invested in all of the people in here, and there are a lot of similar themes, and yeah, both of them made me feel this particular way that's kind of difficult to describe, but it was very similar when I finished both of these, like how I felt. Then we have some mysteries, and these two I'm putting together for a very specific reason. So we have The Fury by Alex Michaelides and Everyone in My Family Has Killed Someone by Benjamin Stevenson. The Fury is the story of this reclusive ex-movie star who is one of the most famous people in the world, and who every year invites some of her closest friends to her private Greek island to get away from the English weather. And this time around, of course, because it's a mystery, someone gets murdered, and it's all very spooky. Everyone in My Family Has Killed Someone is set in the Australian mountains in winter, where we have this family reunion of a very interesting family where basically all of the members of the family have killed someone in one way or another, and the family reunion is very tense because there's a lot of complicated family dynamics that we're exploring, and then of course when they get there, there's even more death and people start dying. Now, these obviously have in common that they are in the same genre, but the thing that made me want to put them together is specifically the narrative style of both of these books. Both of them are written in first person, and we're seeing the perspective of the main character, who is addressing the story to us, the readers. So it's a very specific kind of writing, and sometimes the main character will like break the fourth wall and address the reader directly. And this is a thing that I really like in books. It's kind of hard to find. Maybe I'm just not looking in the right places, but it's a narrative style and like a style of storytelling that I really enjoy, and it's in both of these. I much prefer Everyone in My Family Has Killed Someone, but I enjoyed both of these, and just the style of it is very interesting because you're not entirely sure if you can trust the story that you're being told because you're only getting this one perspective. Both of these do have holiday settings though, even though they're different. Like one is a Greek island and the other is like wintry mountains, and they do both have like a closed circle thing going on, and I feel like both of them have like a certain level of dark humor, which I really enjoy. And yeah, I liked both of these books, and if you have any recommendations for books with this kind of narrative style, I would love to know because I really enjoy these kinds of books. Next, we have a couple of witchy books, and if you've read these, you'll know that they are quite similar. We have Slewfoot by Bo-Reum and The Year of the Witching by Alexis Henderson, and I love me a good witch book, and I really enjoyed both of these. Slewfoot is set in colonial New England, and our main character is a spirited young woman who becomes a widow quite soon after she gets married, actually, and she spends her time trying to survive, and she wants to keep what little freedom she can in this society, and that causes some problems. And then while this is happening, there's also this thing in the forest that has awakened, and the story is all about how both of them try to survive and sort of figure out who they are. The Year of the Witching is set in a place called Bethel in this rigid puritanical society where our main character is the result of her mother's union with an outsider, and this has cast her family into disgrace. Now, the daughter has a lot of questions about her mother, who has then since passed, and it seems like maybe the dark wood surrounding Bethel might be able to give her answers, but no one is supposed to go in there because it's evil. The settings of both of these books are quite similar. They're both set in places with a lot of religious oppression, and both follow female main characters that are... they don't necessarily just want to give up everything because society tells them to. And both books have witchcraft in them. Both main characters have connections to witchcraft. And I would say that both of these are kind of brutal in ways. Like there's some violence and some gore, and there's a lot of darkness in both of these books. I would say that Slewfoot leans a little bit more adult, whereas The Year of the Witching leans a little bit more YA because of the main character's ages, and I would say they have a similar atmosphere. Like both are quite dark and eerie and like gothic. Slewfoot probably leans a little bit more into like a folklore vibe, which I really enjoyed, but both of these are excellent. Both of them have feminist themes to them, and yeah, I really think if you like one, you'll like the other. I will say Slewfoot has some illustrations that are quite creepy, and you can get like a sense of the vibe from these illustrations. But yeah, if you like witchy books, I would really recommend both of these. Second to last, we have some adventure, which is one of my favorite genres. So we have What the River Knows by Isabel Ibanez and The Antiquity Affair by Lee Kelly and Jennifer Thorne. And both of these are historical fiction adventure, and they're so much fun. What the River Knows is set in the late 1800s, and we follow a Bolivian-Argentinian young woman who decides to travel to Egypt after the death of her parents. And she feels like she hasn't gotten answers to what actually happened, and she thinks that there's more to it, which turns out to be right. And so she gets to Egypt and she starts looking into the death of her parents. And with her, she has this like weird, slightly magical ring that her father sent her before he died, and that's like a part of the story. And with her on this adventure is, of course, this infuriatingly handsome assistant who is determined to get in her way. The Antiquity Affair is set in 1907, and it follows two sisters who are the daughters of this esteemed archaeologist. And they basically get pulled into this whole situation when a secret society is looking for this lost magical relic, and they get pulled into it basically because their father has spent years looking for this thing. Both of these are set for a big portion of the book in Egypt. Both are sort of centered around archaeological expeditions, and again, both of them follow female main characters. There's a bit of romance in both of these books as well, which is sort of interwoven with the adventure. So it's there, but it's like a side thing. And both of these are just like super fun adventures with a lot of like action and swishing around. A big difference between these though is that What the River Knows follows a single perspective and The Antiquity Affair follows two alternating perspectives of these sisters. So that's a pretty big difference. I would also say that What the River Knows leans a little bit more YA and The Antiquity Affair is more adult, and What the River Knows does have some magical elements to it, which is a big part of the story, whereas in The Antiquity Affair there isn't really, I don't want to give anything away, but there's not that much magic. It's more focused on like puzzles and trying to figure things out, I would say. Both are just super fun though, and they are the kinds of books where things are a little bit convenient sometimes. Like sometimes things just, you know, it's just written like that to drive the story forward and you kind of just have to go along for the journey. But I really like that in these kinds of books because it's just a lot of fun to read and you can just have a good time. Then at the very end, we have these two books. We have Bunny by Mona Awad and Catherine House by Elizabeth Thomas. And these books are both like super weird, and they're the kinds of books where you read them and you're like, what even is this? Which, like, those kinds of books are not for everyone, but for the right reader, they're great. Bunny follows a student who is a part of this highly selective writers program at a university in New England, and she basically mostly keeps to herself. And in her class, there are these girls that she hates. They're all best friends, and they all call each other Bunny, and they're really weird, and she just really doesn't like them. But then one day, she gets invited to one of their events, and she sort of gets dragged into this like weird dark world with these girls. Catherine House is set at this super elite school hidden in the rural woods of Pennsylvania, and this school is like amazing, I guess, because it churns out like all of these great minds, and a lot of really like powerful people have gone to this school, and it's like super elite, and if you get into it, it's a huge opportunity. There is a catch though, like if you get into the school, you have to give 3 years to it, and you can't leave it during those 3 years at all, and you cannot have any outside contact with the world. And we follow a girl who gets into this through various events. She gets into this school, and she gets there, and it becomes clear that there's some weird stuff going on, and there is something weird and dark going on that is like sort of lurking beneath the surface. Now, if you're gonna like any of these books, you have to be okay with books that are basically like all vibes. Like, I don't really know how to explain it, but these books, you really have to get on board with it just being a vibe. And both of these have like a dreamlike slash nightmarish feel to them that I know not everyone likes, but that I really like. And it's a very particular like thing in books. And these are the kinds of books where you have to be okay with things not being properly explained to you. Some things are super ambiguous, some things don't really make sense, and they're a little bit confusing, but if you can sort of get on board with it, it's quite a journey. Both of these books have like dark academia vibes. Both of them follow a single female perspective. They both have like cult-like vibes that appear throughout the books, and both of them are, I would say, sort of psychological, and we're following these characters sort of unraveling in a way. They are a little bit different in that Bunny is a more like horror fantasy type situation, whereas in Catherine House we have a more like gothic mystery going on. But the vibes are very similar, I would say. And these are books that I don't easily recommend to anyone because they really are for a very particular kind of reader. But I think if you like one, you might like the other. Even though they're super weird, they are books that have really like stuck with me, and I think about them a lot. And yeah, you just have to go with the vibe with these ones, because that's kind of all it is. It's all vibes. Wow, that was a lot of books, but we've finally made it to the end. Now, I'd love to know if you have read any of these books and what you thought, and also if you can come up with any of these kinds of matchups. I would love to hear about it. Like, leave a comment and we can all read them. I think it's an interesting way of recommending books, even though I feel like sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But if you can come up with one, I would love to hear. That was kind of it for today, though. As always, thank you very much for hanging out with me today, and I will see you soon. Bye!